Welcome to the Personal Development Mastery Podcast. I'm 𝗁𝗁𝗄𝗯𝗲 and my mission is to inspire you to rise up, grow, stand out and take action towards the next level of your life. I interview leaders, influencers, entrepreneurs, authors, exceptional people who can and will inspire you to improve your life. Tune in for 2 episodes each week and make sure you subscribe to the podcast to get the episodes as soon as they are released. In today's show, it is my real pleasure to speak with Dean Fox. Dean, you are a mind performance specialist, an international speaker, a business consultant and coach. A few years ago, your life totally spiraled out of control with one blow after another. Bankruptcy, almost fatal car accident, deciding to end your life. And then you had an epiphany that changed all of that. You are now passionate about helping business owners and entrepreneurs end procrastination and take inspired action to achieve their goals and dreams. Dean, I am delighted to have you on Personal Development Mastery today.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me, Aggie.
And this is actually the second time that we are talking on the podcast because I spoke with you for my previous podcast a couple of years ago, and I wanted to expand on some of the things we discussed at that time and also, discuss some newer things that came across. Then I would like to start with some elements of your story, some background that will help the listener get an idea of who you are and especially that big turning point in your life that completely changed that. So would you like to share some elements of that with us, please?
Yeah, sure. So, my background in the corporate world, I spent most of my career in the sales and business development sector for different organizations. I was always looking for the next thing. So I grew fairly rapidly and for most people's external view, successfully from, a junior sales rep, if you like, through to national sales manager for a blue chip company. I ran a team of salespeople around the country, and for most people, I had what looked like, a very successful career. 7-figure accounts that we ran, expense account, company car, the house that went with it. I had a young family at the time. So on the outside, the view was that I had everything that would make you happy and feel successful. But I never felt like that. I had what I now call this when-then mentality. I was always looking for, when this happens, then I'll feel good enough, then I'll feel successful, then I'll feel happy. And whenever I got to whatever it was that I wanted, I realized it didn't make me feel like that. So I just thought, maybe it's something else. So I went for another when. And that kind of was the progression of my life. And yes, people will say, that drove you to where you were. But ultimately, even when I got there, it didn't feel the same. So I would have just been on a constant treadmill, if you like, of looking for this external thing. And what happened was in the early 2000s, I made this decision, having become the national sales manager and had this perceived success. I made a decision because I didn't feel that the way I could feel like that, this is my next when, if you like, would be if I went into business for myself. So if I set up my own business and I had success with that, then I'd feel happy and successful. So I left the corporate world in the early 2000s. My wife and I set up a property development and investment company. And we had success with it. We grew it to multi-6 figures by 2007. And we were looking at, what that might do and how that might develop into a 7-figure business and beyond. And then 2008 happened. The financial crisis, global financial crisis, that I don't think any of us foresaw when it was going to happen, and also the impact that it would have, particularly in our industry. And so by the end of 2009, we'd effectively lost that business with and everything that went with it, and that meant that some of those things that I felt previously, people talk about imposter syndrome, this idea that I'm not good enough and I don't feel like I should be here. They all came back. The doubts that I had, I struggled with those through 2009 as that business started to unfold. And at the end of 2009, I made the decision that the way we could survive and get through this difficult period would be for me to go back in the corporate world. I get a job, and that would see us through. We'll ride out the storm. And that's what I decided to do in early 2010. And then, as you alluded to at the beginning, in March of that year, my wife, myself, and my youngest son were almost killed in a car accident. A fairly serious one. Road was closed for 5 hours, took 2 hours to cut us from the vehicle. My son was airlifted to hospital because they thought he was going to lose a leg. So it was a really kind of difficult period after that. From a physical perspective, 6 to 8 months of recovery. But more importantly for me, what that meant was it put paid to my plan of going back into the corporate world. I physically wasn't able to do that in that period of time, which then added more financial pressure to us. We still had all the outgoings, but zero income coming in. And I think the other added thing was that in order to protect something that I swore to my family that I would protect, which was our home, I never wanted to lose that. I had to make some really difficult decisions. And one of those was I ended up personally bankrupt. So we lost everything else, but we kept our home. And I think the pressure of that, along with everything else that happened over that 2-year period, started me on a journey, or a downward spiral, if you like. My mental health suffered. By the end of 2010, I was struggling with depression. I didn't even know that that's what it was. I couldn't even have told. If someone had said to me, "Are you depressed?" I would have said no. But I describe it often as if I was swimming against the current. Every day was a struggle and a battle. And it drew me to a point where in December of that year, I'd left the house one morning. I said to my wife I was going for a walk to clear my head and kind of think about our next steps and how we got back to where we should be. But the truth was that wasn't why I was going out. I left the home, went to some woodland near where we lived, and I made the decision that I was going to take my own life. I felt my family would be better off without me, that they were in the position they were in because of me. And also just that I didn't feel like I had anything else to give. The world would be better off. But the turning point, if you like, the epiphany for me was that in that space, when I made that decision, there was a period of time, for however long it was, minutes or seconds, where it was as if someone had lifted all of that stress and pressure off and allowed me some time to think without it. I just felt extremely calm and peaceful and with no worry or anything. It is as if everything fell away for just a short period of time. And it was in that space that I was able to ask some questions of myself, I suppose. And the biggest one was, why? Why am I going through all of this stuff? Why did I not die in a car accident 8 months ago, but are looking to end my life now? Why am I still experiencing these things? And it was almost as if those questions just gave me enough of a light at the end of the tunnel to say, well, maybe I should figure this out first before I do anything else. And that's what brought me back home. And from that point on, I kind of spent the next kind of 10 years, if you like, everything from that point on was all about trying to figure out those questions. Why did those things happen? Why do I feel the way I do? Why do I do the things that I've done? Why did I not do some of the things I maybe should have done? And it was that journey for myself that brought me into this space of personal development and coaching and speaking without any plan of ever doing that. It was never a strategic decision. And I say often this idea that there's a lot of pressure on people these days, I think, to find their purpose. What is it they're passionate about? My own personal opinion, and I genuinely believe this, is you don't find a purpose finds you. Your job is only to be open to it when it comes along. And so I had no intention of being a coach or a speaker or anything like that. It just happened that way. That was my purpose. And I realized as I started to be open to those opportunities that that's what I was meant to do. And that the reason I went through all of those things was to be able to share what it's like to go through those things, to help other people who may be going through them or may not yet have gone through them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of, in a nutshell, that's what brought me to doing what I do today.
Yeah. That moment in that day when you had that short period of peace inside your head, that space of peace that allowed you to ask a different question or find a different answer. For me, when you describe that, it certainly sounds like some kind of guidance, some kind of, this is not the end, Dean.
Yeah, but you're right. If people had asked me at the time, what happened that day, I couldn't really describe it. I only ever felt that I'd only ever felt that way once before, and it was actually seconds after the car accident that I didn't feel in any pain. It was just calm. I couldn't hear anything. I could see, but I couldn't hear anything. It was as if things were in slow motion. It was a strange feeling, but I could never describe it. I couldn't understand it. But looking back, and the things I've gone on to study and learn now, that's exactly what it was. It was this ability, like I say, it was almost as if somebody lifted everything off and said, "I'm going to give you just a few moments without any pressure, in complete peace to think about what's happening before you make this decision, and then we'll discuss it when you've decided after that, if you like." And so it definitely did feel like that. Looking back now, that's definitely what it was. It was somebody, and all of those things that happened were points that led up to there. For me, they were all guidance. They were all directional. They were all pointing me to somewhere else. But as I said, this idea of that a purpose finds you, but you have to be open to it. I just wasn't open to it, and it was giving me nudges, and it was giving me, signs, if you like, and I was ignoring them. And then, it gave me some things to change the direction physically. So I definitely feel like that now. That's what happened. More so over the last probably 3 or 4 years than before that. But definitely, yes.
Thank you. It's the guidance is actually haven't been on my own circumstances, shall we say, that one day something happens and changes completely how your life turns up after a few years. It's always truly fascinating as such. Tell me, do you want to tell me also about when you got back and what happened that changed that you had afterwards?
Yeah, so coming back home, I went back into the house. I went into the office that we had at home, into the library section of it where we had our books, and I think I was just looking for some inspiration. I was looking for something to kind of give me a sign that I was doing the right thing, that there was more to be found. I should learn, there was some answers to the questions that I had. And I took a book from the bookshelf, which was called Think and Grow Rich. I'd read it numerous times before that, but never really got anything from it, if I'm being brutally honest. But it was the copy I took, which is the one that's on my desk here, which is kind of, as you say, I carry it. It's kind of an ever-present version. Is a copy that my son bought me, and he bought me it at the airport on the last family trip we took in 2008. So just before the financial crisis hit us, we were on a family trip, and he bought me it at the airport, and I'd kind of read it. It was to read on the plane, and I'd read some of it, but I guess I didn't really get any. But that day, I took it from the shelf and started to read it, and I couldn't put it down. I saw things in there that I'd never seen before, and obviously they were there. But I say now when I'm talking to people that we don't see things that we never saw before. We see things in ourselves. that weren't there before. And I couldn't put it down, and I haven't. I often talk about this idea that I read it every day. I've been reading it ever since, and I have various copies of it on my bookshelf. And people ask me, why have you got 3 or 4 copies? One of the reasons is that the copy that I started reading, and I still go to often, but it's kind of, you'll be able to see probably, it's full of kind of notes and highlighting and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
But I also have a copy that doesn't have anything in it. And sometimes I read that.
Like it's your first time.
Yeah. And I do it specifically because of that. Because what I found was, over the years I've been reading this, is I often read, and I'll read the bits I've highlighted, and I'll read my notes. And yes, it helps and it confirms some of the things. But sometimes when you read it with fresh eyes again, it's like, yeah, I know, I never saw that one. And I go back to the copy that I've made my notes in, and I'll look to see whether I picked that up last time, and then say, oh, I didn't see that. Okay, and I'll make some notes around that. So for me, it's just an ever-evolving process. And so people look in the copy that I have, and they'll see it highlighted in different colors, and because it's things I've gone back to the second after I've read a clean copy, if you like.
Yeah, I get what you mean. And even if it is slightly different edition, it might have a different words, even a few different meanings. They might completely trigger different responses or different layers of understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. And that book, it started my journey. It was the thing that kind of kick-started me into going, okay, there is more. I need to kind of figure this out. And that started me, going into personal development, which I never heard before.
Mm-hmm.
I'd always read, but I never really understood that there was a thing such as personal development.
Yeah, I get it. And that's actually one thing that I wanted to discuss with you about. In terms of personal development, the lack of implementation of knowledge, because the knowledge is out there. All the personal development books, courses, seminars are out there. So if someone could take that, not even all that, a fragment of that information and apply it, that would completely change their lives. However, the information is there, but the implementation is lacking from people. So I wanted a comment from you. Why do you think that is? Or what needs to change for that?
I think there's 2 things. So one is, I use this phrase a lot. I talk about shelf development. Okay. People buy things and put them on the shelf.
Yeah.
And people, I've been guilty of that in the past, whether it's been books or whether it's been courses or events. I've gone to things and come away and felt great, but never done anything with the information. So 2 things. One thing I talk a lot about when people ask me, I get a lot of people who say, could you recommend a book? New people starting in entrepreneurship or whatever, can you recommend something? And my answer to the question always is, yeah, what do you want to learn? Because I could recommend, my bookshelf's full of books. I could recommend hundreds of books, but what are you going to learn from the book? What is it that you want to get? So when I'm reading now, apart from like Think and Grow Rich, I read intentionally. I look for something that I want to learn something about that, and then I'll go and seek something out and focus on it. And I don't necessarily just read the book and put it away on the shelf. I tend to keep it out. It'll be sat on the desk for months. So, my wife sometimes says, are you still reading that? And I'm like, yeah, because, I'm not just reading it. I don't read it just because I've read the book. I'm studying it. I want to know
exactly
what's in it. What can I take from it? How can I use it? So that's the first thing, is I think people don't do things intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
So personal development is full of, the industry's got lots of information, but it's full of lots of people who are just going through the motions of, I've read another book. I was chatting to someone recently who said, last year I read 52 books.
Yeah.
And I'm like, has it changed your life? And they're like, well, no, not really. And I'm like, well, you could have read one book and it might have changed your life if you just implemented everything that was in it.
I so much agree with you with this kind of speed reading, and let's read as much as we can, and let's put Audible on double speed so we can absorb more information. But what's the point? I mean, no matter how quickly you read, even if you read one book a day, you're still not even going to scratch the global knowledge. And yeah, I completely agree with you, Dean. And I have my own book which I read every day for years now. It's the Daily Stoic, which
Yes,
I
I've got a
repeat.
copy of that.
And I realize more and more the benefits of really absorbing some knowledge, whichever resonates with you, and really going into the depth and applying it. Because
Yes.
otherwise it's lovely, but it's not a novel. All the personal development books are not novels to read. You have to practice, take the exercise, do what they say. Otherwise it's you just waste your time, really. Might as well read a novel and enjoy it rather than reading Stephen Covey. It's not the easiest reading there is.
Absolutely. And people have said that about Think and Grow Rich. People say to me, it's not the easiest book to read.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, but it's not designed for that. It's designed to give you information you can practically use.
Exactly.
If you implement everything that's in it, it can change your life. And I think the reason that lots of people don't implement it is because they've not done any of what I call the foundational things. So yes, there's a starting point for everyone. Reading Think and Grow Rich was my starting point, and I've read hundreds, if not thousands, of books since then. But the things that changed for me the most were when I started to do the work to change who I was in order to see the things in the books that I needed to see and then implement them. So the reason that most people don't get the results they want is because they don't take the actions that would lead to those results. And the problem for most people is, actions, and we talked about this a lot, but actions are a result of behavior. Results are the result of our actions or behaviors. And most people think, well, I'll change that. I'll change my actions or behaviors. But actually, actions and behaviors are a result of what we feel, and feelings are a result of what we think. And so we need to be thinking about making change at an identity level if we're going to have the results that we want, because otherwise they can't be sustained. You might get some results, but they'll not be sustainable. And that for me is why, the personal development industry it's prevalent that there's this level of shelf development, that people are searching for things because they've not done the bit in the foundational bit, if you like, on themselves in order to get the information and take action on it in the first place.
Yeah, there's so many things that come to mind now with what you say about the Jim Rohn's practicing simple discipline every day, which it's things are much simpler in order to really create change. Not easy, but simple.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big fan of Jim Rohn. But one of the things that he says, which is something I repeat a lot, two things, but really resonated with me. One is this idea that he tells the story that he was approached by, a large conglomerate, multinational company when he was at his peak, and they said, we'd like you to come and talk to our senior members, and they wanted him to share his wisdom about, the future. What do you think the next 10 years is going to look like? And he kind of tells this story where he says that, he got them all to lean in a little bit and said, you're right, I do know. I do have some insights, and I do know what the next 10 years are going to look like. They're going to look pretty much like the last 10 years. And for me, it was like, he talks about this idea that it's the same mix.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's more opportunity than difficulty, but it's the same mix. And so that really resonated with me because, I share a version of that story where I talk about this idea that what matters is what we see. It's not necessarily, we see our own reality, our own version of what's going on. So in 2008 and 2009, I saw more difficulty than opportunity. I have this idea of, hurdles, that's all I could see. Whereas people launched a business in the same time as that are now billion-dollar brands. Yeah. It cannot be the reality that causes that. It's got to be the way that we look at that reality. in our version of it. So that's what started my journey into, okay, so I need to go back a step. Let's forget what's happening out there, and let's look at, who I am and what I think about what's happening out there, and then let's see if that can change things. And that's when things started to change.
Yeah, you remind me of that phrase that I don't see things as they are. I see them as I am, because that will completely change the perception. Dean, I wanted to ask you, so during that journey of personal development, I know that the last few years you have developed an interest in the spiritual development in self. So can you share how did that spark start, and what fueled it into this passion that it has become now for you?
I think that I suppose, if truth be known, the spark was probably always there. So I look back at the times in the woodland and the car accident, that feeling, that sensation of, wow, that was, to feel like that in that space. How did that come about? How do you end up like that? And I probably put it to one side as I started to work on myself and understand, who I was, and make changes, if you like, or reveal. I don't like the word change. I'm a big believer in, we don't change, we reveal who we are. It's like peeling back the layers to reveal, the truth of who we are. And so as I started down that journey of doing that work, and I had, coaches and mentors to support me to do that, it was actually one of my coaches where I was talking about this idea of those words, revealing, this idea of peeling back the layers, and people say to me, but you've changed, you're a different person than you were 10 years ago. And I'm like, I don't see that. I'm not a different person. I'm who I'm supposed to be. That's the way I feel. I feel like who I was then was, I was wearing a mask. It was a facade, not necessarily who I should be. And he said something really interesting to me, which was a concept that was shared by someone who was one of his mentors, which was this idea that, what we project, if you like, onto the screen of who we are, is not necessarily who we are. Who we are is the screen. And it took me a little bit of time to kind of understand that. And he shared some more things with me. But essentially, the concept being, if we took the computer screen, when there's nothing on the computer screen, it's black. And then when we project something on, when you and I are talking, it's not black anymore. There's something there. But the black screen doesn't go away. It's still there. It's just covered by what we see. And that started this idea in my head that, okay, so this idea of peeling back this layers links to that. It was this whole idea of, okay, so the more things I take away, so rather than adding, the more things I take away, I should essentially be left with who I really am, the truth of who I am. And that started me to think about and explore, okay, what does that mean? And what will that look like? And then I started, and I said, like I said, shared at the beginning, I always try and read or learn intentionally. And so I was like, okay, this is something that interests me. I want to learn more about this. And so I sought out some mentors, some people who were in that space to say, what does that really mean? What does that look like? And I'm also a big believer in this idea that because of the tons of information there is out there, you have to find someone, something that resonates with you. From a coaching perspective, I say to everyone that I coach, when we're having an initial, let's say we're having a discovery call, it's as much about me discovering whether I feel I can work with them as it is about them discovering where they can feel they can work with me. And so there's tons of information out there, and I've learned and worked with lots of different coaches and mentors around the world, and they all have different styles. So it's about finding what resonated. So I went through, lots of different people and mentors who share information in that space, in this spiritual space, to see if I could find what really resonates with me, because I often describe myself as being spiritual but not religious, which I don't know whether that's actually a thing or not. Maybe they are the same. Who knows? But I think that religious has a connotation for people. And I think once you start talking about, a denomination or, using the word God or whatever, that people then tune in or out. People then make decisions about that. Whereas I found the mentors that resonated the most with me were those who didn't really necessarily talk about a denomination, or they just talked about this idea of the truth of who we are. And so, I've read lots of books of people like Eckhart Tolle, and some of his things really resonate with me. But I think there are two people whose information I kind of absorb the most at the minute. One is 𝗁�ស៊𝗻𝗂𝘃, and again, there's parts of things that Mooji says that really resonate. There's other parts where he does have a more religious aspect to what he says, and so it's about picking out the bits, I think, that kind of resonate, but also add to your understanding. Deepen your own learning. Because for me, it's the same as coaching. For me, like I said, it's about revealing the truth, and for me, it's about you don't learn something from someone and then go, right, that's it, I've learned it. You they say something and that resonates with you, and then you internalize that and say, okay, let me kind of play with that, if you like. Let me experiment with that and see whether or not that seems true for me. And those are the kind of mentors. So there's a guy called 𝗁𝗵𝗄𝗃. His work really resonates with me. He's probably the one I read and listen to the most at the minute, because he's very, very direct in his viewpoint, but also very experiential. He's very much about, try this, tell me from your experience. How does it play out for you? What is your experience of this? And that's the bit that really gets me there, because I think that allows me to sit with things and kind of experience them and say, so how does that work? How does that feel for me? What does that tell me? Rather than somebody just saying, here's what you do, and then you'll end up at this point. It goes back to our shelf development. I could read the book and put it on the shelf and say, well, that's the way it is. He said something, I was listening to something recently where someone asked him a question and said, I'm seeking enlightenment, and I don't know, I'm not sure how I will feel when I'm enlightened. I don't know what I'm looking for. It was the question. And his answer was really direct and simple, which was, how do you know you already aren't? And it just, those questions, they really resonate, because then it's like, well, that's a good question. How do I know I'm not? What is it that I'm waiting for? And that develops. So some of his things really resonate with me, because he gets you to think. It's not just about him sharing some information and you going, all right, okay, that makes sense. So I really like that. But it's become more of a bit, I suppose, a bit of a passion. It's the thing that kind of ties some of the other bits together, I feel. It's almost been like, I think you have to go on this journey, but it's almost been like a little bit of a missing piece. So when I look back at some of those events now, like the time in the woodland and the time at the car accident, when I felt the way I did, I now have a different perspective of those times and what that meant for me, and why did I feel like that. And so it's that's kind of what led me into this kind of stage, if you like, of my own personal growth and development, was that I have a more of an interest in that now than I ever had. If someone had said to me 5 or 6 years ago, let's explore this aspect, I probably would have said, it's not for me. I'm not religious. It's not my thing. But as I've got further and deeper into some of this personal development and the understanding, and I think it's all based on those questions I shared right at the beginning. Why is this happening to me? Why am I here? What's my purpose? What's this about? Who am I? You keep asking those questions, and you learn a bit more, and then you take that question a little bit deeper to the next level, if you like. So that's kind of why I'm studying some of the stuff I'm studying now. And it's not for everybody at every point in their journey. I'm very mindful, from a coaching perspective, I'm very mindful that not everybody is ready for me just to say, okay, well, have you thought about this? Let's explore this. It's not necessarily the right time for everybody. And it's about figuring out where they are and then helping them with what information we can and what implementation they can for that part of their journey. But always with an eye on the next step will come as you start to peel back these layers and reveal who you really are.
If we put side by side personal development and spiritual development, do you think that there is a point that one ends and the other begins, or do you think they go parallel, they merge? Is there, both of them, with both of them, you are required to look inwards, one way or the other. But what is the the difference, the fine line? Is there? I'm trying to find something here.
Yeah, my personal view is I don't necessarily think they run parallel or one starts and stops. I think they merge. And I think that what happens is that when you are in the right space, on the right point on your journey, it's like I said earlier on about the purpose finding you. I think when you're on the right point of your journey, those parts that are merged, between the spiritual and personal development, you start to see them. And when you see them, there's an opportunity for you to say, actually, I'm going to explore that path a little bit. I'm going to, or you could say, no, I'm not going to explore that path right now. And so I think that they're intertwined. I just think they show up at various points in your journey. I spent 5 or 6 years studying myself and learning some of this information before I ever got anywhere near thinking about what does that really mean? Those questions I asked myself. But yet when you hear lots of the mentors, in the space, whether it's particularly those who've been around for a long time, but whether it's Tony Robbins, whether it's Bob Proctor, whether it's any of the kind of those types of mentors, they all have a reference. There's always a reference to the spiritual part of their journey and our journey. So I agree. I think it's intertwined, but I think that as a coach, it's about finding where that sits for you. So I've been at events where Tony Robbins has shared some real deep stuff from a more spiritual perspective.
Yeah.
But I don't think he does that at every event. I think it's depending on where it sits in his space, and he's found his niche in terms of his business, but he's also obviously very self-aware, as is Bob, as a number of other people. And I think for me, that's what happens. I think that you start in the personal development because it's more accessible.
Yeah.
This idea that I'd like to make some changes to me or my life is more accessible at that level than starting from the perspective of, who am I?
I get it. And there is also that you mentioned earlier, that the religion has all made us, even though I don't want to really leave the conversation to this, but religion has influenced the way we see about spirituality. If I were to ask you, what's your definition of spirituality, then what would you tell me?
For me, it goes back to the idea of the truth. For me, that's all it is. It's this understanding of the truth about who we are. I don't see it as anything other than that. There's, and that's why I refer to it being spiritual rather than religious, because whatever you want to call that, the universe, God, Allah, however you want to refer to it, for me, they're talking about the same thing. Everyone's looking for the same thing, and studying or listening and learning from some of those mentors like Mooji, like Rupert, and various others, Eckhart, they all talk about this this peace, if you like, that everyone's searching for this peace, and you don't find it out there, if you like. That's who you are. That's the essence of who we are. And my view, and I've got, like I said, I don't class myself as being religious, so I've got no viewpoint on anybody who is religious. That's an individual's choice. But for me, that's just another external. We've now given that to somebody else, if you like, whether that's the universe, whether that's however you want to phrase it. We've now externalized that. Whereas, if what I've learned is true, that we're all one, then how do we have this external thing that's responsible? So for me, it is just this idea, this truth about who we are.
Let me. There's one more question I want to ask in this topic. I'm not sure how easy it's going to be for you to describe it, but I want to ask, so during this journey, the last 3 years of your spiritual quest, if I can call it like that, what is one big breakthrough, one big lesson that you've learned that completely has changed you, and you say that this was really my right path?
Okay, again, I suppose it is difficult with lots of the things that have gone on, but I think the biggest thing for me came from a meditation that 𝗏𝗏𝗂𝗏𝗏𝗄 talked about, and it was two aspects to it. Three aspects, I suppose. One of them was an aspect around time. So he talked about this idea that we're all talking about now, being present in the now. And Eckhart talks about that, and it's a phrase that we're comfortable with, But Rupert did his perspective was a little bit different, because he said, and I talk about these direct questions. He said, okay, so I'm going to ask you a question. Right now, taking now, being present now, what's different between the now, and the now earlier today or later this evening? And that really stuck with me, because I'm like, well, that's true. There is no difference. There's just now. And he was like, so if we take time out of it, we just have now. So it's ever present. That was a kind of real breakthrough for me. That was like, wow, yeah, okay, that's huge. The second thing he shared was this idea between inside and outside. So he talks a lot about, we talk about an inner person, the me inside me, if you like. But he gave me an experience, I suppose, where he shared this idea that if you take a room, the room is bounded by walls. But what's the difference between the space inside the room and the space outside the room? So inside the room I'm in and outside in the window, what's the difference between the space in here and the space out there? And again, I was like, well, there isn't any. There isn't anything. And then he was using that to get you to think about, well, is there an inside me and an outside world, or is it just all one? And again, that was another kind of real eye opener for me. And the third and final thing, which kind of is something I've talked about, is this idea that he shared, sensations, if you like. He talks a lot about sensations and perceptions, and our view, if you like, of how things should be. And he talked about, when you touch something, if you touch the desk, where's in your experience, where is that feeling? Because initially your view is what's in my hand, but ultimately when you go to that point, it's like, well, no, it's not. My feeling of that is not there. And so those three things together started to open up, if you like, my eyes to this idea that there's not this inside outside. There's not this external world and inside me, if you like. There's just this whole thing. We're just one. And what I see out there, he did a thing where, again, lots of his stuff's very experiential. When you look out through your eyes, you see things. Okay, now look in. So if you can see with your eyes, look in. If you look at your hand, can your hand look back at you? And it was like, and they sound ridiculous at the time when he's saying them, but when you actually, do the experiment, if you like, in your own experience, it's like, well, yeah, that's so true. It's really profound. And some of those things have been the biggest things that have changed my viewpoint and allowed me to kind of start exploring a bit more around some of those things, this idea of who I am. And this idea, I think the biggest of them all, I think the biggest profound statement is this idea that my mentor shared with me that he'd obviously learned from Rupert, which is this idea that the truth about who we are just becomes veiled by the mind, by our ego, however we want to call it. And at times that veil gets removed and we're exposed to the truth. And when we're exposed to the truth of us just being peace, love, joy, and happiness is blissful. And I look back at my time in the woodland, I look back at my time in the car and realize that that's what happened. That veil was removed and all that was left was who I really was. The problem is that, we then re-enter, if you like, the world, and that veil comes back again, and so it's like putting the picture over the screen. But the thing is, the biggest profound thing for me is that it never goes away. It's always there. Your job only is to reveal it more often, so eventually who you think you are on this outside doesn't appear anymore. You are simply in this space of who you really are. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the most profound thing that I've learned that has changed the way that I view everything in my life and in the world, ultimately.
I find it truly fascinating, and I know that for someone who may not be very, experienced with this, it might sound like the mind can't quite grasp it, but it's very different when you actually have the realization from inside that, that's how it is. And I've had some of my own discoveries similar, so it's truly fascinating and difficult in many ways to capture from a conversation.
Yeah, and I think that's why I like Rupert so much, because his approach is not so much about the conversation; it's about that you try it.
The experiential that you said, that's the only really way to describe it, because it is beyond the mind. You can't comprehend the mind using the mind. You have to go beyond that.
For sure. He talks about this idea that you're trying to discover something about the infinite using a finite thing. The mind is finite, and it's trying to look at something. It's not possible to do that.
It's never going to happen. Then I would like to start wrapping things up with, it's been a truly fascinating conversation. One more time. So just a few quick fire questions then. What does personal development mean to you?
Again, I suppose it's the same in that for me, it's all about this revealing the truth about who you are. Mm-hmm. The journey that you go on through personal development is about revealing the truth about who you are. And when you do that, everything else falls into place. I don't think it's about change, it's about revealing.
Thank you. And if you could go back and meet the 20-year-old Dean, what's one piece of advice you would give him?
I thought about this a lot, actually, because I've been asked it quite a few times recently, but
it's a great question for reflection.
Yeah. I think the one thing is, I suppose there's a couple of things. One is, I wouldn't necessarily change anything.
Sure.
But I would tell myself that that whatever happens is happening for a reason, and you need to trust the process. Mm-hmm. It will get you to where you need to be, but be more open to some of the signs. Trust your intuition more than you perhaps would like, because you will get opportunities, you will get signs to do things, and you may ignore them, but actually don't. Just go with the flow a little bit more. Because, like I said, there were times when I were given signs to make changes, if you like, or to go a different path and didn't. And so wherever you're meant to be is where you'll end up anyway. It's just about how you play the game on the way.
Absolutely. Thank you. And then, emerging from this conversation we had today, if you were to give to the listener one actionable item that they can implement straight away or tomorrow morning and improve their lives, what would you advise?
Again, I suppose the first question I would answer that with a question first of all, which is what would they like to change the most?
Yes.
But I think that one of the things that I did, which had a profound effect in my life, is that once I decided what it was that I wanted, whatever that was, and I spent a lot of time. I have a process that I use for that. I spent a lot of time developing that. So I suppose that the tips are three things. They're in three steps. The first of all, be very, very clear on exactly what it is that you want. Even if you have to change that over a period of time, or narrow it down, focus it more, I suppose. Maybe not change it, but focus it more. But be as clear as you possibly can on what it is that you want. And be prepared to say no to things that aren't aligned with that. So the number of times I hear people saying, this is what I want for my life, but I'm having to do this. So, well, you don't have to do that. You could do something else that's aligned with what you want. You feel free to change. And the third thing in that step is write whatever it is that you want down onto something that you can see and have with you every single day, to make sure it stays at the front of your mind and you become immersed in what it is that you want. Because I think it's one of the things that is really simple to do, but can have a profound effect if you use it effectively on an ongoing basis. It's like everything, we talked about earlier. If you don't implement it, then it's not going to do anything. But ultimately, it had a huge impact on me, just because it's a constant trigger, a constant reminder of what it is that you said that you wanted to do. And you can then take action on it long after the time when you first said, this is what I'd like to do.
Yeah, and that's so important because it reinforces your emotional attachment to that goal that you have set. Then how can people connect with you and find out more about what you do?
Okay, so I'm if they want to reach out to me on social media, I'm on Facebook and Instagram and Clubhouse. And they can get me there at 𝗏𝗏𝘀𝑆, so the same handle on them all. Or they can reach out to me on my website, which is 𝗏𝗏𝗂𝘆𝗀.com.
Fantastic. Thank you. I enjoyed our conversation very much, Dean. Thank you very much. I wish you all the best with your explorations and with also empowering others to find really what they deserve in their lives. Any last parting words?
I think that, my thing I'm sharing at the minute is two things, I suppose. One is a quote that came from Denzel Washington, which I hugely admire as an individual. But he said, don't aspire to make a living, aspire to make a difference. And that's something that is, hugely resonant to me, particularly over the last few years, is that that's where I should focus my attention. And the other thing for me is, we talk a lot about taking action around things, but the other thing is that this is something that I kind of developed and believe myself, is that it's aspiration, not perspiration, that leads to realization. So, the number of times I see people work hard, but seem to get nowhere, if you like. And for me, it's because hard work on its own doesn't deliver anything unless you have an aspiration attached to it. So those two things are my kind of things that really resonate with me right now and are driving me in terms of where I'm going.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and rate it on Apple Podcasts. and also share this episode with someone who you think will benefit from it. If you want to find out more about what I do and gain access to exclusive content, join my Facebook group Personal Development Mastery. The link is in the show notes, or you can simply type bit.ly/PDM group. And until next time, stand out, don't fit in.